And my guest today is Colonel Douglas Macgregor. I got to tell you, audience, I have one of his books here, what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about his history, but the more investigation I did of his background, I never realized, Colonel, just what a disruptor you are and what you were in the Army. And in my mind, you weren't just a colonel in the Army. I mean, you're part of the history of the U.S. Army. So, wow. Thank you so much for being on here.
Well, it's nice of you to include me, since large numbers of retired four-stars have tried to write me out of the history. So I appreciate somebody trying to write me back in.
Well, I tell you what, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was introduced to you through your guest appearances on Tucker Carlson. And by the way, your name is known in this house because when I turn on Tucker and I see you, I'm like, Jen, Macgregor's on, get in here. We got to watch. So, and I think you're saying what a lot of veterans are saying, and what a lot of veterans believe and their families believe, that I think a lot of us are very unhappy with our senior military leadership. And frankly, I live on LinkedIn. And when I see some of these four stars doing leadership workshops and speaking, I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, I guess General Westmoreland wasn't available, right? So I'm not impressed. And the fact is that you have spoken the truth to power, I think, as George Marshall was known for. And I think a lot of people, because of you, people realize that not everything is rosy in the senior military ranks. And the fact that we just left Afghanistan in such disgrace, I think really has raised that awareness. So, and you were a big part of that. So thank you from my household for speaking the truth.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks. I appreciate it. I also, I'm also deeply saddened by the experience of so many veterans over the last 20 years. I could probably add the other 10 on there, 30, but certainly for the last 20 years, when they wake up and discover that, frankly, a lot of the people at the top have felt nothing but contempt for them and have simply used them as however they saw fit in order to advance their own interests. I think that's probably the single most distressing aspect of the last 20 years. Just look at the people who've enriched themselves and profited enormously, but have ultimately done nothing. And we've always had a problem, to be blunt with you, with not enough senior officers who shared the danger and risks of their troops. That's not a new phenomenon, but I think it reached its all-time low point over the last 20 years. And I recall receiving a phone call from Newt Gingrich when I was still in active duty, and I had planned, over everyone's objections, an offensive on Baghdad that employed far fewer numbers. But of course, the original intent was not to stay in Iraq, which made absolutely no sense to do so, but we did it anyway. But he was concerned because once we were there in May and June, and I had said, well, when are we leaving? Of course, the sticking point at that stage was, oh, well, we've got to stay to find Saddam Hussein. And we had already discussed ways to do that would have gotten us out, but won't go into that. But he said, what do we do about all of these improvised explosive devices, these command detonated mines? They're starting to do a lot of damage. What do you think we should do? I said, well, that's very simple. He said, really? I said, yes, you need to do what Sir Gerald Templer did when he was in command in Malaya. The Field Marshal Templer had been a battalion and brigade commander during World War II in North Africa and Europe. And Templer, when he was brought in, an armor officer, obviously, first thing he said was, every senior officer in the theater, this is in Malaya, will go on a patrol, foot patrol or motorized patrol, every 2 weeks. And they will do so as members of the crew or squad or platoon, whatever it turns out to be. They will not go with an elaborate security detail. And so very quickly, just imagine what happened. The patrolling stopped because these brigadiers and major generals didn't particularly care to be blown to pieces. They realized very quickly, what's the point of going out and patrolling these routes over and over and over again that simply sets you up for destruction and casualties that you don't want to take? Then he said, well, what else did he do? I said, well, the other thing he did is he announced to the Malays that they were leaving. The British were leaving Malaya. I said, we ought to tell these Iraqis that we're not staying. We will leave. Oh, no, we can never do that. I said, well, we will. You know, Iraq's not the 51st state. We will leave. But then Templer outlined in great detail the conditions that had to be met before the British could withdraw. Have to set up a court system, have to have a penal system, have to have a police force, you know, all these kinds of things. Well, suddenly the casualties dropped dramatically. And most of the Malays who were part of the resistance simply said, well, they're leaving, let's go home. So they went home. The British found they were fighting a small number of Chinese communists, as opposed to thousands and thousands of Malays who wanted to drive the British out of their country. None of these things were accepted. No one could do any of those things. It was sort of bizarre. Why would we indicate to these people who would stay in Iraq forever? It's just an utterly stupid idea. But I think it was part of this sort of a narcissistic view that, you know, we had to impose ourselves on people, whatever it took. But then you had the other problem. The other problem that came up was, of course, Fallujah in the spring of 2004. And this was just before I left. And again, I was asked, you know, what do we do? I said, well, first of all, you bring every tank, every gun, and you completely cut off and surround Fallujah. Only one way in and one way out. Everybody has 48 hours to get out who wants to survive and doesn't want to be part of the, you know, the growing cemetery that's going to emerge as a result of this. And I said, you just put them into a little internment area so that all of the intelligence officers can find out who these people are and record them. And I said, then after 48 hours, you go in on 2 axes on the ground. He said, well, why aren't you going to bomb it? I said, no, we don't need to bomb it. We need to go in with artillery guns and direct fire, 155s. So you can take down a whole city block with a couple of salvos. And you just go block by block. Whatever refuses to surrender dies. And you keep this up until you essentially conquered Fallujah. He said, well, my God, you're going to end up destroying Fallujah. I said, yeah, that's very likely. So what do you do then? I said, well, you should take photographs and distribute them across Iraq and make it clear that anyone who opposes us or attacks an American soldier, Marine, sailor, airman, whatever, this is the fate of those who attack us. And then the answer came back, and this is a very interesting answer. Oh, we could never do that. And I said, well, then it's time to leave. Because if you do anything else, it will just get worse. And of course, it got progressively worse. But we don't understand, or never understood from the very beginning, that if you're going to intervene in this part of the world, there's no nice way to do it. You would like to do it minimizing casualties and minimizing the numbers of human beings whose lives have to be destroyed. We all want to do that. But inevitably, what we precipitated was going to happen. We were precipitating the emergence of opposition. Then you have to crush it mercilessly, completely, ruthlessly. And we can't do that because our quote unquote values won't permit it. Well, then it's time to leave. Don't stay, just pull out. And of course, the answer is, oh, we can never just leave. But that's exactly what we always do. We just leave. And the people in Washington who were so dedicated to keeping us in Iraq and places like that were doing everything in their power to keep us there indefinitely because they know from experience that once we leave, and Vietnam is a perfect example, we don't go back. And so the effort in Afghanistan and Iraq is quite similar. It's not to accomplish anything, it's to keep us there indefinitely. That creates a money flow for all the wrong people and all the wrong reasons. And it disguises the utter futility of your intervention from being revealed to the American people. So the longer you're there and the fewer casualties you take, the better off you are rather than simply getting out. And you minimize your casualties very simply by not doing a lot of the things that you did to begin with and building up these fortresses, these forward operating bases. Of course, all of this is destructive to an armed force. You know, as Genghis Khan said, he refused to occupy anything. And so he said, occupations turn soldiers into jailers.
Oh, wow.
So the Mongolian armies never occupied anything. They would leave a small garrison to back an indigenous government. And provided the government paid its taxes or tribute to the Khan, quite frankly, the Mongols didn't care what happened in the country. But if the government suddenly decided they weren't going to pay the tribute or they were going to strike out independently, well, then the Mongols would send a number of Tumans back and level the place to make the point. It was an object lesson. But they didn't occupy. Occupations are destructive. They ruin armed forces.